Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ComicBase Livestream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and to everyone who survived 2023, congratulations. Give yourself a pat on the back. Anyway, welcome to 2024. This is our first show of the new year, and it's, I don't know about your New Year's, man, but I hope it was fun. Mine was definitely interesting, and I will not say anything further about that for now. But anyway, guys, welcome back to the new year. We're going to be talking a bit on this show about kind of a year in the review for 2023. A little bit, we might get into what's ahead. I definitely want to share some ComicBase news, some announcements, and some tips for folks, particularly if you're just started using ComicBase for the first time or you just renewed as part of our big holiday sale. By the way, a little bit of business right now. We did extend our holiday sale just through tonight at midnight Central, and this is no fooling around. This will not be extended. Yeah, I mean, like at the crack of 11:59 and 59 seconds, it all shuts down. So if you have not upgraded your subscription, you haven't renewed, if you're got the pro and you're thinking of going to archive, any of these things right now, this is our big sale of the year. I can more or less guarantee it's the lowest you will see all year long on this whole point, even though the year is 3 years old. But the other thing is, if you guys have been following us for a while, you also know that traditionally we don't do a lot of sales except for anything except Black Friday and Christmas. So being that the next Black Friday is a really long time from now, if you are thinking of jumping on anything right now, don't delay. Like I say, no kidding, the whole thing really does shut down 11:59 tonight. So and with that said, a couple things. We are temporarily sold out of everything's getting very short. There's probably going to be very brief shipping delays on a couple of things. This stuff obviously doesn't affect you if you're ordering digital media. So if you're renewing your ComicBase or buy it for digital download, you'll obviously have your product right away. If you could, though, on the other hand, give us an extra day or two to catch up with things. We've been absolutely inundated, and a couple of things sold better than we ever dreamed, and so we're resupplying a few things. And also, the last thing I'd say is, if you are looking to grab a wireless barcode scanner, we have like 2 left. So jump on those right away, because those are going to probably sell out within the hour or two. So okay, with that said, yes, one thing I did have a note for myself to tell everyone is, if you miss out on the sale, there is one bit of good news to pass on things. We have introduced with the last few weeks the idea of auto renewing subscriptions, and what we will be doing in lieu, we won't be having sales. We almost never do. But what we will do is we are making it so you can save yourself money if, when you renew your subscription, you just basically you get an option at the end that says, do you want to renew for a one-time billing price of X, or do you want to make it like X minus 20, $30? If you will just allow us to auto bill you next year at this time, so that you don't have to, basically we don't have to convince you once again to renew it. It'll just, unless you're actively pissed off with us, it'll just auto renew, and just like every other subscription in your life. In other words, the difference is that we actually give you money off for that, as opposed to everyone else, like your cable company just bills you. And of course, there's you can cancel anytime you want. So if at any point you decide, no, not really feeling it, want to get out of it, just go over to your registration, say cancel auto renewal, and you're out. But if we locked in any kind of price deal for you right there, it'll tell you, hey, your price was locked in at this lower rate. If you do it later, that obviously no longer applies. But anyway, that is as hard-headed and mafia-like as we're going to get on that whole thing. But we are hoping, it does look like the auto-renewing concept, which it's been used in the world for the last million years, but first time we've done it is this last few weeks, and it looks like that went over okay with y'all. So we do appreciate that. We were definitely, anytime we change business type stuff to introduce anything new, particularly involving how we bill or do things like that, we're always nervous, as they say, a bunch of cats in a long-tailed cats in a room full of rocking chairs. But we finally pulled the trigger on it. It looks like you guys were all down with the program, and then people seem to like it. So we're going to be keeping that up. So with that all said, Doug asks, if my subscription expires on April 1st, if I renew today, will the news expression be April 2025? That is correct. Yes. So renewing your sub basically just adds a year to whatever you're doing. If you switch versions, like if you had an Express and you suddenly go to an archive, it's going to be a year from the day. It doesn't extend your old Express subscription if you move up. But anytime you've got the same product and you move, you stay with the same version, you renew, it just adds a year to whatever you've got. So pro tip, just we're amongst friends right now. If you get a chance to save money on it, and we're just telling you that the price is good throughout, grab it while it's cheap. I would want it for myself, and so I expect you would expect me to tell you as well. All right, with that said, I want to say hi to everyone here. Richard's first in the door. We'll talk about the O Street thing from the ComicBase After Dark thing in a bit. Andre, hello. Welcome from Canada. Thomas B, Happy New Year as well. Jet City Comics is joining us here. Ed Billiot. Xandu Comics from the Pacific Northwest out in Seattle is joining us. And another Ed. So, and Doug Grant, obviously, in the house. And to everyone else who hasn't put in the chat, if you want to have questions posted to us during the whole thing, please put them to @ComicBase TV. And that way it pops out in a way that I can find your stuff a little bit more easily, and so keeps the whole thing rolling. I'm going to try to keep the show to an hour tonight. I feel like in a way I've got a lot to talk about, but I'm going to try to keep it limited. But I do want to prioritize, obviously, your questions on top of everything. So if you have questions you want answered and everything, put them in chat, and I'm going to more or less prioritize them against almost everything else that I was thinking about talking about. But with that said, let's move on with things. So I did a couple days before the new year went in. And by the way, for everyone who got my newsletter, it realized that I'm looking at the wrong calendar page, and so because I swear to God, until about 3 o'clock on December 31st in the afternoon, I swear to God, I thought it was a Monday. Apparently, it was a Sunday, but when you're coming off vacation and holiday things like that, it's really easy to lose track of time because all your normal references for what day it is are all gone. So apologies to anyone I confused with this one. But I, at any rate, was working that Sunday. And I decided, well, I'm going to get ahead of things, before everyone else comes in on the new year. And I'm going to put out kind of our year in review newsletter. And so I sent that out to everyone who's on the mailing list. If you didn't get it, by the way, make sure you go to your profile at www.comicbase.com. And go to your my account and then contact info. And make sure you're signed up to get our announcements list. Because if you don't have that checked off, then we don't send you mail because we don't want to annoy you. But anyway, if you want to get things like that we only send to the announcements list, please check that off. And Jerry from Tennessee is just trying to say welcome. Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to, of course, obviously give one final pitch to let people know the sale was on. But more importantly, I wanted to kind of say, all right, let's take our victory lap and say, what have we done this year in terms of ComicBase and in terms of everything else like that. So that's the point where I run special scripts that, basically sum up a bunch of things that we've done and give some hopefully fascinating stats of what we've done during the year. Well, all right. So amongst the things we've done in year 2023, obviously we released ComicBase 2024, which, the main emphasis on that version, it's either very sexy or not sexy at all, depending on your point of view. But in addition to having a really bitchin' cover, a new version features over 1 million covers for the archive edition. Matter of fact, we passed that milestone even just shortly prior to its release. But we really, really dug in on the lessons of how can we make ComicBase, with this massive amount of information it has with it, how do we make it easier to deal with and install just for the end users? And one thing we really want to do is say, well, on one hand, we want to make it so you've got access to all the pictures of comics that have ever existed on the entire planet. And at the same time, we'd like to make it so it doesn't take 100 years to install all that stuff, and it doesn't, eat up all your disk space and things like that. And so we pulled off a lot of, I think, fairly clever things in the ComicBase 2024 installer, to the point where if you can manage to turn off your antivirus, and that turns out is really key, but we can install an archive edition on a modern computer with an SSD in a little over 20 minutes. Instead of installing 4 DVDs, dual layer or double Blu-rays or whatever else with a trillion things, we can get the whole thing done with one installer, zone out for about 20 minutes, watch the game, whatever the thing is, and just let it rip. And so that got to be that's a much better out of the box experience than we've had before. One thing we didn't get around to, which I hope to do very early this year, is to also get you a getting started video. So if you're new to the program in particular, something that just leads you around an updated version of the getting started video that's on our ComicBase YouTube channel, to just kind of give you like, here's the 5-minute lowdown of how to get rolling with ComicBase. That is high on the priority list for this year, and I'm hoping I can get that done within the month. But this year, yeah, we released major updates to the program. Also, a lot of neat things in there. A lot of ease of use improvements, a lot of content improvements. In addition to the program, though, we also introduced just an astonishing amount of content. So the stats for the year in terms of new content in 2023, we had 6,766 new books, 166,420 new comic books. Now, I'm going to say right now, a lot of this is just going to sound like I'm just reading off large numbers. But to give you an idea, 166,420 new comic books is about twice as many comic books as are listed in the last issue of the Overstreet Price Guide that I ever owned. And that's how many when we added this year. Now, granted, are they all fabulous new culturally important comic books for Americans? Not so much. Ton of foreign stuff made its way in. One thing that's definitely bumped that number up is if every comic book that hits the market comes out in 38 variants, which we'll get to that part in a minute, that definitely tends to bump your number up. But yeah, we detailed information, breakdowns, and so forth. 166,420 new comics this year. 80,377 new magazines. 1,025,171 new newspapers, and my favorite one for the year, 134,208 new cover images. Those include brand new ones and also updated versions of scans that we had before that we've supersized and so forth. This brings us to a total of, and of course that's the one stat I'm not going to have at my fingertips, but I know it relatively cold. It's 1,024,000 and I think 170 cover images in the database as of when I wrote the newsletter. So a few days ago. So at this point, we're probably over a million and 25,000. So that's what we did in terms of that stuff. And then the other thing that's the fun stat in terms of database updates for the year is there were 5,321,208 database price and content updates made during the year. Which is all kind of a frightening way of saying between all the things we added, all the things whose price changed, all the things where we fleshed out data, where we added more information and so forth. If you have been letting your database get out of date in terms of not downloading content updates, oof, that adds up quickly. It's not a very static world in terms of it's like it's I seem to remember a day where I could have the 22nd edition of the Overstreet Price Guide, and when the 23rd edition came out, I didn't feel like everything that was in my database records was completely obsolete. I no longer feel this way for any length of time in the modern comic market. Things are changing so damn fast. So anyway, if you haven't done so before, definitely suggest seriously consider renew those subscription updates. That's the last I shall give as far as the commercial stuff for the year. I feel like we kind of beat that one into the ground during the sale. But and also a thing I think we'll be doing in future go-arounds of the Christmas sale is probably be a much shorter sale. I don't know about you guys, but it feels like if you keep a sale running out there for like 2 weeks straight, all the way between like the week before Christmas and when everyone gets back on New Year's, I don't know about you. To me, it feels like it loses some of its sale magic just in terms of like excitement. So look for sales to be a little shorter in duration this year. So definitely get on those mailing lists. So if we ever do something, you get apprised of it at the time. All right, let's see here. Brian Stewart says, been spending my time on Spanish comic book inputs, Spain, Mexico, Chile, etc., since we seem to have the US UK market widely covered already. Yes, and by the way, Brian, very much appreciated. Yeah, it's it's funny because I remember the first time we added like a German comic book. It was like a copy of Die Spinne that I picked up in Munich on my honeymoon. I thought, wow, this is great. I wonder if those crazy Germans have published any other comic books over the years. I'm sure they must have been a few. And Since then, of course, we've added hundreds and hundreds of thousands of foreign comic books to the database. But yeah, even now, it's starting to feel like we're starting to really just fill the place in. So I, at some point, it's got to be the case that the pace of additions to the the database slows up in terms of comic books, but it hasn't happened yet. We added 166,420 new comic books. The equivalent number from last year, I believe, was 88,000 new comic books added over the same period of time, which again, it used to be that in I think the last edition of the Overstreet Price Guide I had, when we were able to count up approximately how many books it had in it. And again, I don't claim this is current data, but this is back in the middle of my top comic collecting years back in the 90s. It was a number like 100,000 and change, 120,000, something like that, because obviously there's a limit to, if you're going to print it on paper, even if you say issues 210 through 283, and you do this all in one tiny little line of type, there's a limit to how much you can do with a physical medium like that. Not so for better or for worse with databases. We can keep on adding data as long as it's interesting. So that's a thing we've done. But at a certain point, I gotta think we've covered the game, right? Right? Anyway, 31 years doing this, it hasn't happened yet. So it seems like logically that we have to fill it in at some point, but yeah, this is I think we're coming up on our 32nd year of doing ComicBase, and it, like I said, it hasn't happened yet. All right. So the other part of the newsletter, though, is in addition to bragging about what we've done, is I want to churn some stats on the comic market. And so I looked at the last newsletter and I said, well, what did we look at in terms of stats for last year? What might be interesting to let you all in on in terms of the whole thing? And so I'll start off with okay. We've been making a lot of noise in recent years about the number of variants. It's been a topic that frankly has me a little bit on edge. It's obviously a lot of work. There's the variants have definitely dominated the comic market in years of late, and we helped contribute to a couple of different articles on Sketched about just the number of variants over time. And so you guys have seen previous podcasts where we've charted that out. But I want to see, well, what's the year-wide stat for variants in the U.S. comic market? And here, what I'm doing is I'm talking about all comics published in the United States, and saying how many were published and how many of them were variants. And the total for comics whose cover date we knew and whose cover date fell between January 1st, 2023, and ended before January 1st, 2024. So these are cover dates. It's not exactly street dates. Again, take the data for what it's worth. Right? So don't take it to the 17th decimal place. But with that said, it's a pretty solid stat. And for the U.S. in 2023, 85.3% of all comic releases were a variant of one sort or another. So at that point, you're talking about basically called 7 out of every 8 comic books released in the U.S. comic market were a variant of one sort or another. This, to me, we've talked about it at great length, particularly on the ComicBase After Darks, when we have a chance to have a couple of drinks and drown our sorrows, is a source of some consternation for me. It feels like too much, but maybe I'll defer. Obviously there are people who are buying them, and so I think as long as they still sell and as long as they're very cheap to make new variants, I don't think we're going to see this stat lay up on us anytime soon. But obviously, at the same time, I do worry about a market where it costs so much to keep up with. First of all, it makes comic collecting very complicated. We can make a bit of hay on that when we say, hey, well, suddenly there's a very compelling reason other than just I like looking at comic covers to say I want to have an archive edition because photo reference for all those things makes incredible amounts of sense. That being said, as a comic collector myself, it adds an enormous amount of static to my life. Do I have the A variant, the B variant, the C variant, the Q, the version 28 variant? Suddenly, it's without a barcode scanner, a copy of ComicBase, and preferably photo reference, it's impossible to tell anymore. It really makes, just saying, look, I just want to have one issue each because I read Nightwing. I just want to have one issue each and have the story in my head. Suddenly, this is a much more complicated thing to do than it was ever done in the years that passed. And I do wonder, how much this is acting as a gateway to new comic users joining the market, as opposed to, I mean, are we basically just monetizing the hell out of existing comic users by selling them multiple copies of the same thing? Or is it something, I mean, is there a fact, is there anything about this that attracts new users to, to the market? Because if it just raises the cost of entry to the market, I don't love that, and it doesn't really matter to me personally because I don't sell, own a comic store. But it doesn't really strike me as a great direction. I'd rather have like a whole lot of new users reading comic books than have a small number of users that we're all getting $1 trillion out of them every year because we're selling them the same comic book 38 times. That's my personal point of view. Please share your points of view in the comments. Everyone's allowed an opinion on this one. All right, so let's see here. Da, 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 da. Okay, Jerry asks. Okay, oh, that's okay. Doug Wren says, besides the live stream, where do we get comic news? Used to get good news from Comics Buyers Guide. Yeah, that's a great question. These days, comic news for me, there's about a half dozen sites that I'll browse with some regularity. Everything from comic book resources, CBR, Bounding into Comics, Ain't It Cool News, etc. There's a bunch of people that kind of come into my feed on a daily basis. Obviously, we get a lot of follow-on news just from the ordering process. So everyone from Diamond to Lunar and everyone else will let us know when new editions are happening, and Heritage Auctions will obviously spam us with, oh, here's the guys doing new signing, or we just set a new record because of this sale or that sale or the other thing. And then there's also a question of periodically, one thing that we have very good data on is when, I say things like, all right, well, what is the percentage of variance on the market? I literally can just issue queries against ComicBase to get some of this aggregate data. And some of it's very eye-opening to me. Like, I did not see this coming. We'll get to the overall market value here in a minute, because that was one that was like, what? And let me make sure I didn't do something wrong. And so I had to run that number a few times. Again, I'll save that one as a teaser for now. There are a number of good comic podcasts. Thinking Critical, the guys over there do a good one. Bounding into Comics does one. It's not bad for having in the background if you're not looking for a high dose news feed. I mean, they'll definitely, if they got something that's on their mind, they'll just keep letting you know about it. There are, like I say, have a look over both YouTube if you just look at comic live streams, as well as the others. And maybe if you guys want to suggest things in the comments, definitely. There's a number of good sources out there. In terms of print media sources, not a lot out there that I have a great deal of confidence at. And obviously, one of my greatest frustrations in the entire industry right now is because of the loss of hegemony. With it used to be that between Capital City of old, and then later on Diamond Comic Distribution, they used to control, basically, if it's sold in the American comic market, it went through them at some point. That has not been the case for a number of years now, and as a result, the people trying to gather stats on the overall health of the comic market, what's selling, what's not selling, as far as new releases, what's the size of the comics market, they're forced to gather and guess from little tiny points of data that are very, very unreliable and unconfirmed. It's more like impressions than it is data. And so they're trying to say, well, only like 3% of the bookstores that we think might be selling comic books are using this particular POS system, but the POS system reports that, this thing's a hot seller. Well, how much would you really feel comfortable extrapolating from that data? Or if you only knew that, say, Image Comics says that, here's our top sellers. And so we'll tell you percentage wise, what's selling really well, but we won't give you the number of copies, that kind of stuff. Very incomplete data is really the norm rather than the rule, is very the rule rather than the exception. And then the other thing that also just kind of drives me crazy is ICV2 tries, and I do think it's an honest effort at the end of the year to sum up what's the overall size of the comic market. But it's also definitely changing their definition on the fly of what constitutes the comic market, as they're forced to no longer say, well, what does Diamond say they sold through or sold into the channel? Now they're saying, well, what is a comic book? Is Dogman a comic book? Well, it's got by the definition they would give in understanding comic books, it's got a story told by the integral juxtaposition of words and pictures. So I guess Dogman's a comic book, as is Dear Dumb Diary, as is, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and so forth. And so suddenly, if you start counting different things as comics, and then you throw in manga and you throw in everything else into the whole thing, suddenly you come to the conclusion that even though single copy sales of Amazing Spider-Man are, two orders of magnitude less than they once were, and your effort, and a lot of current comic stores don't even keep active diamond accounts or active current issue accounts, you come to the conclusion that this is now the healthiest the comic industry has ever been. It's a $2 billion industry. It's the best of times ever. If you guys are interested in like the deep dive into this whole thing, the first hour or so of our last Comic Base After Dark kind of gets into it, probably more than I ever want to get into again, at least until we have more solid data. But the lack of solid data is definitely that is definitely my biggest frustration with the industry right now. The only people I know who have real data on whether the things we would consider comic books, or at least most of us who grew up with, the old model of if we're of a certain age, which in other words, we read, the Claremont X-Men when they were first on the stands, say, if our idea of what the comic market is, the people who know how it's doing today are the execs over at Marvel and DC, which is now to say Comcast and Disney. They know what their actual sales are, but no one else is talking, and they aren't talking either. So everyone else is guessing, and how good the guesses are, yeah, I'd say tread carefully and don't put too much weight forward on any particular thing. All right. With that said, okay. So, Rich, I'm going to get to you in a second. I'm just trying to set things up. All right. Was the breakdown this year by source country for those 186K changes? I haven't done that drill yet. It occurred to me as I was pointing, because I started out, really this was an exercise I did over a number of hours just on December 31st, because again, I'm working on the delusion that this is a Monday, and so I'm got my coffee. I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to get this thing out by 3 p.m. and I'm going to have the night off so I can enjoy it with with my guests and family. That was my plan for the day. So I had a limited time frame, and as I'm realizing I'm getting into the year-end stats, it's like, wow, some of these stats are really interesting. And as I double check them, those stats are really interesting too. I could probably get about 5 podcasts out of nothing but burrowing into the market stats for the year. So if there's, if you guys have any interest in the Comic Base Quant podcast or something, let me know, and we'll make that happen. But not all the data is particularly easy to get to. Some of the data is most easily queried by, there's the easy stuff that I can get by just querying, our big database service on the back end. Some of it I have to mix match different data sources and match them up, and you do the best you can on short notice. So again, I'm not going to go very heavy into the stats where I'm like, did I have a way to cross check this a couple of different times? But I'm showing you what I've got. But yeah, there's definitely time to dig into some of the other levels of US price tiers and so forth, because some of the data I did find was pretty darn interesting. Let's see. Opinions are like Brian's. Yes, you win the first comment of the year. Opinions are like variants. 87.5 of us have one. Or apparently, all of us have more than have an average of 8. Steve Herring says hello, Pete. All right, welcome everyone. Coming from Facebook. All right, so other things that were interesting when we looked at the overall data. All right, so one thing I want to look at, I'm going to switch to the other computer for this one. I actually have this prepped, is I want to know, all right, so 85.3 of the books in the market were variants. What was the average cover price? And so I thought I'd look at that one, and we're going to treat this one in reverse order if I can. So let's switch over to the other machine. And these numbers should look familiar to you. We're going to start. I'm not going to start with, well, all right. If we just want to, bottom line it. So the answer is the average cover price for a U.S. comic book, single issue comic book, is as much as we can quantify that in the year 2023, $4.77 cover price. So the way we categorize this one is it's all comic books which were published in the United States, whose cover price did not exceed $10. Now this is a bit of an arbitrary one, so because I guess I can imagine a deluxo edition printing of something with a lacquer cover or something or else. So I actually come to put it that way. If you start talking about Kickstarter efforts, those things probably are if you factored them in, they would be raising this up. But keeping them out of the mix, just so I'm trying to compare apples to apples as much as possible. These are ones that had a comic type of just a regular comic book. And no trade paperback, no hardcover, no deluxe, no variant code that would indicate it is something special, and also a hard coding that this is $10 or less. So the answer on that one, I'm going to try to put myself into the picture here because I always feel weird being off camera while I talk about these things. But if I start crowding out the data of the presentation, somebody flag me down in the chat. I'll try to stop it. So the average cover price of just your regular comic book in 2023, $477, up from $467 the year before, up from $457 and $447. That's a nice little progression, 10 cents a year for the last 4 years. And then things got a little bit more interesting. Price increases were not as aggressive in years past as you went backwards, and there were actually some ripples in the data I did not expect to see, because I figured, I'll go back to 2000 and I'll do it by every 5 years just to keep the punching in the data less more tolerable to me. But then as I went down year by year, it wound up being actually kind of really interesting. For instance, look at this little bubble we have right here. So it's straight year over year price increases to 2015. Down here, then here's $4, $3.94, $3.80, $3.82, etc. Look what happens in 2007. In 2008, the average cover price of all such comic books in the United States was $3.94, which is a decrease pretty significantly from the year before 2007. What happened between 2007 and 2008? The answer is a hell of a big recession. And comic publishers actually seem like they adjusted their product mixes to account for it. And you can tell that, going back a few years earlier, 2003, the average cover price was $3.70. 2004, it had jumped 50 cents, actually 60 cents, to $4.34, $4.39, a little down to $4.27, $4.10. But the big year of the century in terms of the one that stands out is actually 2004. It jumped up to $4.34 as your average cover. That's that was unexpected. It also fell down quite a bit before that. At a certain point, as you guys remember, like say the 80s, suddenly we're getting down to, hey, it's $1.27, $1.77. Actually, look at that change in terms of percentage between just the 80s. So we started the 80s, the average comic book was 66 cents. 8 years later, or 8.5 years later, it basically tripled. 10 years later, it had tripled. That is an incredible run up in pricing just during the 80s. The 80s, if you guys remember the times, the whole thing, 79 and 80 actually were, we had inflation, which then got its back broken by Paul Volcker and the Fed raising interest rates through the roof. If you think interest rates on your home mortgage are high now, they were, I think, double or triple that back in 1980. But we really saw the price take on a real sharp curve at that point. So sharp that I decided, let's go to the graph. And let's bounce over here to that one. I'll have to zoom out a few levels so you can see it. Come on, you can do it. Zoom out. And of course, it does want to zoom out. Give me a second here. You silly, silly computer. All right, let me think how I'm going to deal with this, because it doesn't want to. Come on. That's out. I know you can zoom out further than that. Why are you being like this, you silly computer? Okay, well, let me see if I can make this happen one way or another. Nope. Bugger. Okay. I will find the graph. I will. There it is. Okay. Except I cannot believe this thing is working just fine before showtime. But all right, I guess we're going to do the entire show with this graph zoomed in as further as it is. And now I'm going to take myself off the screen because now I am definitely intruding on the data. All right, so here's comic prices. You see down at the bottom here is 1961. If I'd taken the graph further to the left, all the way back to the 40s, it would basically be a flat line. They were 10 cents for basically 20 years. 61, we did a little bumping here, but and the solid and the dotted blue line here is the 10-year moving average. So just to give you a trend line. But you saw that basically things are not doing much movement whatsoever until about 1974, 1975 or so, at which point they start a curve that is, I guess the way I describe it is approaching vertical. It's this is not a trend line you want to see on anything that you're paying money for. If that's your investments, it's great, but this is a terrible trend line as far as the slope of where comic prices went between, let's say, this year right here, which is, let's look at it, moving down, 2000, and that curve really took off in 1979. Why the hell will this not zoom out? Okay, hang on. Let me see if I can force this thing into a mode. A second, I'm going to come out and come back into the spreadsheet because I think it's being a jerk on purpose. So let's do it this way. There we go. All right, now we're back down with the program. That's much more intelligible. Now, like a fool, I'm going to see if I can zoom in one level. All right, there we go. Okay, so looking at this curve, you really see the prices start to take off. Yeah, they're starting to nudge around there, but right around 19, this point right here is 1977. You start a trend line curve that culminates in 2005 or so that is sharp as all hell. Then something really interesting happens. The price actually goes down, and when it resumes again, it's not at quite the same level of slope that it was before. So we're looking at comic prices, and they're bad, but they're not. In terms of how much they were increasing over time, today's inflation is not as bad as it once was. Didn't expect that. I mean, I can, like a lot of people, fall into the trap of thinking that, yeah, things getting worse year after year. The golden age is past us, blah blah blah. But no, actually, the market does adjust to times. And so the next question that immediately jumped on me is, well, okay, well let's adjust for inflation now. And so now I'm gonna unhide a column I've kept hidden over here, which is what do these prices look like in $2024? Okay, so let's start out with being depressed. And then we put myself back on here. So in 1961, your average comic book cost you 12 cents, which in 2024 money is $1.24. Still pretty damn good deal. I think we'd all take that one. If the average comic book these days is costing basically 4 times that, that's 4 times the comics for your money. Plus, we were getting Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steranko, and he was actually, Steranko wasn't quite in the field at that point, but we had a lot of great stuff going on there. So hard to feel bad about that at the time. Anyway, so let's have a look at the inflation adjusted cover price here. Buck, 24, 54, 41, 39. So inflation rate goes up and down, but we're still, a decade later, 71. All right, we're at $2.01 in 2024 money. All right, so comic books have definitely gotten more expensive for what they are by 71. Let's fast forward over to here. 1980, not so bad. 260, what the hell? Everything got a little bit worse in the 70s, but that's not so bad. All right, let's go back to 90 now. All right, between 80 over here, and then remember, we're talking $2024, right? So today's money. In 1980, if you were buying your copy of, I forget what would have come out in 1980. Where was that? Arak the Warrior, or something. Definitely some early Teen Titans would have been there. But 260 would have been what you were paying in today's money for that whole thing. By the end of the decade, you were paying 472. So what does that make it? What's that? 280, 472, 78. 70% increase in value, give or take. And the relative lack of competitiveness of that. So let's go forward another thing. By 472, the 90s, I'm going to say 472 up to 564, not a massive change of things, right? It's not enough that would have gotten me out of the profession. If I was still a collector in 1990, I still would have been a collector in 2000. And as it turns out, I was. Look at what happened in 2000. So, and the interesting part is the story is really the first half of 2000. So Let's have a look. By 2005, we were paying $7.07 in today's money for an average, just your regular issue of a comic book. This is as expensive as American comic books have ever been. Was 2005. So going back a decade from that, 517, rolling back a decade forward from that, 2015, they were down to 532. And of course, today, and the difference between these two numbers is the difference between January and November. November is the last month that inflation stats are available for. But this is the average for the entire year. This is the average in essentially, I call it 2024 money. Technically it's November 2023 money, but it's the month the highest inflation year available year that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has available for it. But your average comic book today is costing you, call it $4.90 in money. But once upon a time in the low in the early ages of 2005, you were 40% higher as far as what it would cost to buy your average comic book at the time. I thought that was interesting. I did not see that one coming at all. So if you're of a certain bent where you're sitting there saying, well, things are not the same as they were back in the day. So again, if you start collecting in 1961, they sure as hell aren't. I mean, there's no getting by what a great entertainment value comic books were back in the day here. But if you held on through, and again, what did the 80s and 90s bring us other than, the first appearances of, all the great, exciting artists of today, the entire launch of the Image Studios, things like that. If you like Spawn, if you like any of the modern stuff, but it also brought you, the 80s and beyond brought, the stuff that's my favorite comic books, the British invasion stuff, the introduction of people like Alan Moore. The first time you could sit there and be a functional adult reading a comic book and not feel like I'm just reliving my childhood, but I've got graphic storytelling that has something new to say to me. To me, that all happened in the 1980s, and we were perfectly fine to hang on paying prices in line with inflation that were really very similar in terms of today's dollars. So when Watchmen came out, was that 85? So that one would be 370 in today's dollars, 412 in 1986 by the time you finish the series. And today we're paying 470, 477, 490. So we're not 100 miles different. But we did hit a point in 2005 where comic books at this point were as expensive in terms of dollars adjusted for inflation. And let's go ahead and show that the constant dollar graph on here now, which I used to know how to show. Oh, it's the filter over here. I have hidden. I got a chance to discover some Excel features I didn't know how to use before. But the orange line is in 2024 dollars where things are. And we are nowhere near in constant dollars yet in the comic market what we were in 2005. 2005, comics were as expensive as they have ever been by a long chalk. So again, I don't love that the overall price is moving up, but that's really saying I don't love inflation. Compared to other consumer goods, we've basically been solid or below that level since, what year is this? Looks like about 2008. Is about ever since about 2008, comic books have basically been the same price or maybe even a little lower in terms of constant dollars than they've been. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. I hope you guys, hope you guys find it interesting as well. All right, so that's the deep dive on that stuff, and hopefully this isn't too much geekitude on the whole thing. We seem to be picking up, viewers, so I guess that's a good thing. But that's that stuff. We have gone through in previous things. It'd be interesting to map things like variance against this, to map other factors in the comic book market, like trades and things like that. But I mean, again, you could dive into quant analysis on this one for a long time and still have interesting things to say. But I did have one other question I wanted to answer for myself, and that was, okay, so that's cover prices, and we know about variance and everything like that. How did the overall comic market do for the year? And this one I thought was just, again, I did not see this one coming, and it's one of those ones that once I punched in the figures, I'm like, man, I really want to spend some time when I have more time here and double check this about 3 different ways. I did a broad sanity check on it. and it seems to hold up across different levels. I get what I was looking for once I did the initial analysis is I was looking for someone typed something wrong, something like if you guys ever put in the stats in your comic base and suddenly it says like you have $73 jillion and you realize, oh, and I took a barcode and I scanned the barcode into one issue instead of having quantity one, I have quantity 73 trillion of that one comic. I was expecting something like that was in the field, but then so I started trying to narrow it down and see, well, can I find where the data is? Maybe it's just some exceptional point. So I'll start with the first thing. Um, if you so when we want to calculate how the market did, we don't want to say just what was the total value of comic base, all the comic books in comic base at the end of the year minus all the comic books, all the comics that were in comic base at the end of last year. That's not the right stat because that ignores the fact that we added 166,000 comic books to the thing. What if they were all very valuable? I mean, at the very least, it's going to skew your results. So if you want to know how the market did, the question you more or less want to ask yourself is, if a comic book existed in ComicBase in January 1st, 2023, the same set of comic books, so every comic book that we knew about up until January 1st, 2023, what were they worth a year later? And the answer was they were worth $45 million more than they were a year later. They a bit more than doubled the overall market price. And as soon as I saw that, I said, okay, let's check the data because it just sounded wrong to me. Because I'd gone through all of COVID with we'd be going through auction results, and it seemed like every week there was another record-setting auction on some high value golden age comic book that hey, it was $2 million last time it sold, now it's selling 18 months later and it's $5 million. We saw that stuff night and day during COVID, and I thought that stuff had calmed down. It did. In other words, we're not seeing as many just absolutely just eye-watering sales as we once did. I forget what the highest value comic book that sold on the market last year was. I remember it was a new record, but I don't remember being as shocked by it as I'd been in years past because it wasn't as much of a difference. What seems to be the case, and I'm going to say this in a preliminary manner because I was only able to do rough sanity checks on this one just to sort of narrow it down to see, wait, is there spurious data, or is this like a real thing? And so I started striding the market. I said, okay, well, let's pull off nothing but the comic books that are worth under $1,000, just in case it turns out that the thing that's happening is a bunch of $5 million comic books became $8 million comic books, and because there were 50 of them, there's your $45 million. If that's the case, then well, it's interesting, but is it interesting to you? Well, it is if you have one of those $1 million comic books, but it isn't interesting if you're holding, your average comic book is like Dazzler #2, right? So I said, all right, let's pull just the comic books that are worth more than $1,000 or under, and those things saw remarkable growth. And picked a few other tiers, just the ones that are 500, just the ones that are 250. And it wasn't until you really got under $200 that the curve really leveled off. Before then, it was a very broad-based increase of the comic market. And as far as I can tell, just by spot checking, just it wasn't that a small number of things went up very high. It's that a great number of things went up higher than they had been. So basically, $350 humor comic books from forgotten publishers, like ACG or whatever else, have suddenly, or Atlas Comics, Atlas War Comics, things like that. If it was a $350 comic book at the beginning of the year, there was a really good chance it was a $600 comic book at the end of the year, and it would happen to not just one or two comic books; it would happen to the entire title, or for that matter, the entire genre. I mean, it's hard to say what didn't go up. Everything from funny animals to romances to war comics to etc. If it was a somewhat expensive comic book in the start of 2023, it became a even more expensive comic book at the end of 2023 by a good long measure. Very broad based. So it's like, well, that's got to be great. I mean, I'm going to have a lot of very happy customers on that one. And then I said, well, where does the action stop? And well, I went down as far as $50 and under, and at that point, yeah, the action didn't stop. It's still, I mean, for year-over-year growth, I mean, if my stocks did that during the year, I'd be happy, but it's not like everything that was worth significantly more than $50 at the beginning of 2023 was. So if you have a whole bunch of rather ordinary comic books, and I got to admit, that is the majority of my personal collection because I run ComicBase. We buy one of everything, and so I have an awful lot of just something that was a regular comic book, and I still have the same comic book. Yeah, it went up some. I mean, again, if compared to a CD, I did great. But if I was holding a whole bunch of gold, silver, bronze, or even, I mean, I'm gonna even say like early modern comic books that were notable. My portfolio investment, as it were, for comic books would have been doing much, much better than it was. So, anyway, for all of you who are watching who do have, a portfolio of comic books like that, I guess congratulations are in order statistically overall. Obviously, we're tracking a million plus comic books at this point, so there's no guarantee that your particular books did that. But by and large, for the market, it was a very, very good year. So that's interesting stuff. All right, so I think that's about all I'm going to say on that score. Let's get to some viewer questions. Then, right as my voice gives out, I will get to other things. All right, so back to Rich's question at the beginning. What did Bob Overstreet say? So he's referring to a discussion we had at the last Comic Base After Dark. That's Comic Base After Dark is our kind of speakeasy stream we do about once a month, where if you're interested and you can actually be part of it yourself, when we're getting ready to do one, I send a note out to people and just you basically I'll send you a StreamYard link and we just do a show with all of y'all. Where it's me talking all the time, it's we could talk amongst ourselves just like a bunch of guys hanging out, having a couple drinks at the comic store, just talking about stuff. But in the last one we did right before the show, the question came up about how would you grade items such as there was like an Eclipso annual. I think it was the 1992 annual that came with a purple gem, welded to glued to the forehead of Eclipso, the whole thing. Or there's a brand new Godzilla versus Kong comic book that when you I don't know if you got to push a button or you open up or whatever else, but it'll do the Godzilla thing when you do it. How do you grade things like that in a number of ways? First of all, like the Eclipso thing, when the gem is impacting into the comic book itself, because it obviously raises above the surface of the comic book. If you store it at all, it's going to tend to bump into it. What do you do if the gem is off center, if the gem is missing, if whatever else? Essentially, how do you grade these kind of, like what do you do if the batteries have run out of the Godzilla versus Kong one, or the little slit in the paper they had to make in order to insert the gadget that does the sound? How do you grade a comic book like that when it's essentially become a Hallmark card? And the question came up, it's like, well, yeah, I don't know how you grade it. And the first thing I'm thinking is that, well, someone should ask Bob Overstreet, because my theory on grading, guys, is we do not do the industry any favors by having more than one standard for grading in the industry. I mean, everyone ought to be, whether you're living up to the standard is one thing, but everyone ought at least be talking the same standard. So when I talk about this is a near mint, or this is, however you want to call it, you could call it 9.4, you could call it near mint. It's meant to be the same set of defects. One guy's near mint better not be somebody else's fine. Otherwise, it's chaos and we can't talk to each other. It means we can never sell each other anything. And I figure is the guy who set down the rules of play in the beginning with first Overstreet guide. I figure Bob's the guy to ask. And so I just out of curiosity, I pulled up my phone. I was like, oh, turns out I do have Bob's number. It turns out he also lives in Tennessee now. So I hadn't called him since the late 90s. So just it hadn't come up. So I thought, well, again, this is Pete after a couple of glasses of bourbon on a show. Says, well, I don't know, maybe I'll call him over the break and see what he thinks. But I did stipulate at the time, it's like, I'm going to wait till tomorrow and see if it still seems like a good idea. It still seems like a good idea for someone to ask Bob this question. I have, the time I've had to think about it over the break since then, I was thinking, I should be very, very clear with him what the ask is. So it isn't like, hey, Bob, how you doing? By the way, what do you think of these toy things? In other words, because I'm pretty sure Bob is not actually authoring the Bob at this point is he's even older than me, if that can be believed, and older people tend to step down from some of the more active aspects of running their stuff. So I'm not sure who the guy is who actually does the typing into what becomes the guide with his name on it these days. I mean, I guess it could be him, but my guess is, most things such as that are done in conjunction with other people who actually, make the decisions. So I want to be able to convey in a very concise way what the heck is I'm asking Bob exactly before I just call him up and say, "Hey, Bob, we haven't talked to you a couple decades. How's it going? And by the way, you're in Tennessee. I'm in Tennessee. What do you know? And what do you think about these weird little gimmicky toy comic things?" And yeah, so I'm trying to think on that one a little bit more. So I have not actually reached out to him as yet. I want to be able to be concise about what the ask is, and at that point, I might actually need to call Gemstone Publishing, Steve Jeppy, and find out who he's got in charge of it instead of Bob to get the lowdown on that one, because it could be depending on roles and the responsibilities that the right guy to ask that question isn't just the guy whose number I happen to have. So, but anyway, let me think on that one. I'll try to come up with something sensible on that one. But yeah, someone should. It's a good question. Someone should ask it. But I haven't yet asked him myself. So anyway, that's the long version of the answer to that one. But and also in my defense, it's was the holidays. So we're back at work now, and so it's time to handle some things that were on our plates. All right. All right, other things that I wanted to share is tips for new users. All right, so, and these are just questions that have come up either during the last days of the sale, people who've gotten ComicBase new, or just, hey, you're upgraded for the first time in a long time and you want to know the answer. So I just, for anyone's watching right now, I thought I'd share. First question, someone says, do I need to get new discs? So I'm ordering ComicBase, haven't ordered it for a while. Do I need to order it on disc? The answer is definitively no, not at all. Matter of fact, there's one poor guy who's upgrading his archive from a number of years ago, and it really held him up. He's really wondering, like, well, we're having a debate here. Why would you want discs in this day and age? And the answer is, well, once upon a time, not everyone had gigabit internet connections and things like that. And because this is just an enormous amount of data on the archive editions and things like that, for many years, it was our standard advice that you do not want to install this thing off the internet. It'll take forever to download. It's 30 gigs of data. That'll take forever. These days, you got a great, gigabit internet connection, or just a really great one that if you're capable of streaming the latest Netflix extravaganza, then you're probably more than, your best course, I'm going to say, is just download the darn thing, unless you just like having discs, especially with more and more people not even having optical media on their computers. I'm going to say discs is the way to go. The other thing I would say, this is someone who very much I prefer physical media in all things. We hit a wall, well, not a wall, but we hit a limit a couple of years ago where even when we went from, the archive edition was originally a single DVD, and that was a dual layer DVD. Then there was 2 DVDs, then it was 3, then it was 4. We hit a point where like it didn't make sense to make the archive edition into like a 17 DVD thing. And then luckily Blu-ray came out at that point, and then Blu-ray became dual layer Blu-ray, and then it became, eventually we decided, well, we'll have 2 dual layer Blu-rays. So at that point you're starting to talk about, what do 2 dual layer Blu-rays? I think it's something like 90 gigs between the 2 discs worth of data, and there's so much information. If you had if you had the raw version of all these things straight out of our picture server, for all the images there in our library, you'd need more like a terabyte to store it all, and that's just not. It's not effective. You don't need that. It's not a useful way to see this kind of data. So what we've done, and this is actually a pretty, I'm going to again kind of pat ourselves on the back for this one. What we've done in the most recent version of ComicBase is we kind of got beyond this limit of where discs are, where what we did is we said, all right, look, what people do have these days is fast internet connections, and it turns out we've got a really fast internet connection ourselves now. This year we stepped up to multi-gig internet just to serve you data. And so what we do when you download ComicBase now is, if you have the archive edition, is it downloads a bit less than a gigabyte. It's about a 850 megabyte file with little thumbnails. They're about 256 pixels tall, of all the covers. So no matter how big you've got your grid set to, you're going to see all the pictures in the grid the second you install that. And again, on a decent fast computer with no crazy antivirus stuff running that's trying to scan a million things as they're being decompressed. By the way, if it's taken a long time, that's what's happening. Turn off your antivirus. just for the install. But anyway, but we can get that installed in like 20 minutes. And so you've got this amazing situation where you've got all this breadth of coverage. You can see everything. And then we do one final trick is the second you interact with any of it, second I touch a picture, a second I want to use it, I want to view it bigger or do anything, in that fraction of a second it takes you to click on it and say, I'm interested in this one out of the millions that you've got, we can have actually downloaded the high-res version of that one at the best resolution we can give you in less time than it takes to think. But we only do that for the pictures you interact with. In the meantime, the other ones they're all on your machine ready to be scanned very rapidly, just glancing down the list, but they're at a level that is appropriate for scanning. And honestly, what we've done here is we've basically just stolen a trick from video games. This is, if you guys have ever played an open world video game, and you're riding around and playing Red Dead Redemption and you're looking off in the distance at the mountains and stuff like that, they're doing exactly the same trick for you. That mountain might be a 4K high resolution mountain, but it isn't until you get near to it. So as you ride toward the mountain or as you ride toward that tree in the distance and things like that, at that point, progressively they load in the higher resolution texture, because there's no point throwing pixels on at you that your eye can't see. And so they, all it would do is slow down the game, so they don't do it. Well, the same thing goes for us. As long as the pictures are small, as long as they're being displayed in a grid or on a print preview or a report and things like that, there's no sense giving you a 4K image of it because you can't do anything with the pixels. But the second you're interested in it, the second you even think about clicking on it, if we can suddenly make it so that one is now 4K because you're looking at it, it's like Schrodinger's picture, then suddenly you have this amazing thing where everything's really fast. It doesn't take a ton of time to install. It doesn't take a lot of space on your disk. And we can also, and this is the amazing part, we can give you that 4K picture at a higher quality than we ever could have given you if we were compressing them all into even a couple of or even 4 Blu-rays and having you install them all, because we know that you will only need a small fraction of the vast territory that we cover. I mean, if you sat there and just tried to click on every picture in ComicBase one at a time, just if you spent 1 second with every picture, I forget how many weeks it would take you to see them all, doing this 24 hours a day. It's just such a boggling amount of data now. But because we have the set, so it automatically downloads the high things as it goes, because it installs the new things in a very compact period of time, you really get the best of both worlds. I really feel like we pulled off a pretty good magic trick on this one. And so that's why these days I don't install the pictures anymore. And I wouldn't suggest you do it either. What happens instead is download it. When you run the downloader, it'll automatically download all the thumbnails at once. It takes, like I say, like 20 minutes. And then as you use the program, you will find that you will have higher res assets on your computer as you use it. But at the time, it's just the overall impression you'll always have is that everything was always there. And that's really the best way to go. And they'll be better quality than they were even if you were installing them from the start. So, all right, that is the long answer to a short question. Next question. How do I get the years to switch? So if you look at the years in ComicBase right now, they will say if you have the Pro or above editions, it has a price history, and the price history goes back 4 years, and it'll say 2000, 2001, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. Well, it's 2024 now. Where does that happen? Well, when we push the first update of the new content year, you'll notice it takes the extra second or two because it'll shuffle all the prices down. Watch as I hit my mic. Yeah, that's the problem with gesturing in front of microphones. It shuffles all the prices down. 2020 goes away. 2020, 2023 gets copied. 2021 gets copied into the 2020 spot, and everything gets moved down by one, and then 2024 gets moved in at the top. We, by the way, are interested on the. We don't want to make it so ComicBase takes 1 trillion megabytes to run on your own machine. We do, on the other hand, keep price histories going back a number of years on our web servers. And so we are interested in the future. I'm not going to commit to doing it right now, but at some point showing you the ability to go, if you look up a comic book on, say, Atomic Avenue, to see its price history for as long as we've been tracking it. Because, again, it's easier for us to buy a very big, powerful server with infinite space on it than to ask all of our customers to have infinite space on their computers. So that's why we track 4 years, because it's an interesting period of time. It's enough to show an interesting graph, but we're not requiring infinite space to store all the price history through the end of time. But we are looking to have a way of going back further. But the very first time you download a price update this year, you'll suddenly see 24 will appear, 2023 will move down, and so forth. And it takes care of it by there. Now, one guy did ask, said, well, for whatever reason, I like doing all my own stuff, and I like your database, but I don't want to use any of your content, which is like, okay. But so he didn't want to download the update. He says, well, how do I get the 2024? And the answer is, well, you got a little bit of a problem, because the thing that kicks in that shuffling of the years is the downloading of the first update of the year. So I guess if you really wanted to, you could, if you download the update and just tell it, don't correct anything, don't update prices, don't do anything useful, then I guess you'll get the years and not a lot else. I guess you'll still get new titles and things like that. I guess you can ignore them, but it's the best answer I've got, because it's a use case that just doesn't come up much. So anyway, that's a thing. All right, and then the final thing I want to say is, one guy was concerned. He says, hey, I haven't been getting updates to the prices for a couple months. What's going on? And you check the normal things. And the thing I think we figured out is that he's still running ComicBase 2023. So, and again, I apologize if this sounds like a commercial. The whole model we've got going here at ComicBase is, I mean, back when we started doing ComicBase 10, up before ComicBase 10, we were sold like software was sold back in the day. It's like, it was a database that came with the software that did it, and once a year we would update the database and you'd sell it with the new software. And at that point, we tried like hell to carry your stuff over and match your titles and make the price thing match. But during that entire year, you'd been adding your own titles, and adding new price updates yourself. We just try to match them up as best we could. 20 years ago, basically, when we did ComicBase 10, we took on the task of essentially updating the data every single week, where we committed to, that's the point where we opened up our own diamond account. We started ordering comic books like a retailer ourselves. We were like a mid-sized comic shop ourselves over here at Human Computing. And at that point, what we do is every week we give you, we say, like, when you buy ComicBase, you not only get the program, but you get a year of updates. And the updates include all the prices, all the titles, all the content, and all the program updates that come out during that year. And the last one's really important. So in other words, if you bought ComicBase 2023 from us, if we ship ComicBase 2024 during the year that your thing is active, we're going to issue you a ComicBase 2024 serial number for free. You already paid for it. And a short period of time after ComicBase 2024 comes out, because as a software guy, it's really hard for us, especially when we add new things. And if let's say that ComicBase 2024 has new fields, like say item titles, or overall series and things like that earlier versions didn't have, we don't want to have the content updates for very old versions still live. So what we do is, in order to not have to generate the content update file in like 15 different formats and try to keep them compatible over all the time, we say, well, look, it's part of the deal. It's part of the same update package you did. So after a bit of a transition period going to a new version, we say, look, you got to have the new version of the software. It was free. It was part of what you paid for. It's a free update, but you got to have that in order to download the content updates. Because if you don't, then you're probably in a format we no longer support, and it makes things impossible from our end to try to, again, keep that rolling. Anyway, all this is a long way of saying is, you got the program updates for free along with the content update. When we release a new version, you say check for updates. When you occasionally, and it typically happens about 3-4 times a year, you'll occasionally see a note that says, there's a brand new version of the program up out here. Click here to update. Click there to update. It only takes a second. It's I swear to God, it's painless, but it lets us update the program. Because when we do those forced updates, those ones where we're trying to get all of our customers on the same page at once, it's so that we don't have to keep on back supporting ancient versions of the content data, because it makes it impossible for our guys on the back end if we have to keep doing that. And there's really no cause for it, because anyone who's entitled to download the content update is also entitled to download the program update. So at a certain point, we need you to get on the same page on the program. So all along way of saying, if for some reason you seen that notice and you say, I don't know, it's just, I mean, there are programs that say if you click this button, you have to pay us a bunch of money. You do not need to do that with us. But so if you're thinking that's us, that no, that's not it. But if you saw that thing and it says you have to update the program, click the update the program. That's because we won't be able to give you new content updates until you've updated the program. And so that's where that's coming from. All right. Hopefully that didn't sound too strident. I hope it didn't, but but if there's any questions about that, please let us know. All right. So I think that's about it for now. Thank you everyone for joining us. It's a great start to the new year. Like I say, at some point when I talk to the person who is having New Year's Eve or New Year's when we welcome to the New Year's, we had a bit of a story come up. At some point, once I clear with them, maybe I'll share it with the rest of y'all. But I'm hoping your New Year's was less colorful than mine. But anyway, have a great one. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye bye.